All right. But like I said, today is the design commentary stream for Nova, based off of what patrons voted for. They said Nova's the game that they want to know more about. So how I do these streams is I just, like, I don't read the text because that would be really boring to listen to me read. I just kind of scroll through my books and I talk about the things that come to my mind about them that are maybe interesting or insightful. They're also like a total open Q&A. So if you have any questions about Nova, the process of making it, really kind of anything even tangentially related to Nova, I'm more than happy to answer those questions here during the stream. And if you see this after the fact in like a VOD or something like that, you know, you can always, like on YouTube, put a question in the comments and I might be able to get to it, or you can just find me online. I'm perpetually online to talk about this stuff. Ho ho! Got another follower. Thank you very much, Kohlrabi. Very good, very good. All right, folks. So let's talk about Nova. And I mean, we have to start by talking about this ridiculous cover. Ridiculously good cover. I'm so excited to have you all here. Honestly, I'd love to hear how you went about designing the layout. I struggle with layout so much. I wish I could answer that question. Layout was done by the incredible Jam. Let me just go get Jam real quick here. Dino Berry Jam. Jam is the person who did the layout. So the reason people like Nova is because it looks good. And I can tell you a little bit about how Jam did her layout, because she sent me some insights about it. So when we get to the first header, I'll talk about Jam's stuff, like how she did headers in particular. So Jam was originally slated to do the frame layout and had a really cool example layout for frame already set up. I loved it. It was looking real cool. Obviously, frame didn't happen. And that's just something to acknowledge here at the top of this stream. Nova exists because of the frame incident. So I tried to make a Warframe game. Warframe fans lost their goddamn minds. Licked the corporate boots of Digital Extremes and basically harassed me nonstop upon launching my Kickstarter. So, canceled that. Then I was reborn. I rose from the ashes like a phoenix and created Lumen as my spite project. Lumen was me just stripping away all the flavor of Frame and turning it into an SRD that other people could make games with. Let me finish that sentence. And then I was like, well, I should probably make a game. And that's how Nova started. Nova was originally just a repainting of Frame. And it was truly me just like changing the settings so that the Warframe people wouldn't get so mad. It changed a lot over the process and became its own thing, which I'm really thankful for. And a lot of people have been kind enough to tell me, like, hey, you know, Frame is cool, because I've released Frame since. But, like, they, you know, they say that, and this is kind of people to say, that Nova is better than Frame. And I think so, too. So I'm thankful for that. So, that's the Frame thing. But now we're here. We're designing Nova. The premise of Nova, the setting of Nova, is the sun exploded. Bummer. Bad news for us. And because of hand-wavy sci-fi magic and reasons, it didn't obliterate us. So what instead happened is sun explodes. Shards of the sun plant themselves into our planet, and we start to rebuild around those shards. So what is, like, ostensibly an apocalypse event becomes this ability, becomes this ability for us to, like, suddenly rapidly evolve our technology, because we have, like, mini Dyson spheres as we rebuild around these shards of sunlight, which are just incredible sources of light, warmth, and energy. which then creates these badass, powerful mechs called the Sparks, and that's what Nova is about. You are these Sparks. You're going out into this sunless world that we have, exploring the ruins of old Earth, fighting back against some pretty gnarly forces that are trying to like snuff out the sun shards. And it is a Lumen game, so it is a power fantasy. This is 100% me wearing on my sleeve my inspirations of power fantasy video games. I'm obsessed with things like Destiny, and I was obsessed with Warframe, and this is me bringing that to the tabletop. So, here's the cover. This is the sun exploding and the very cool logo that Eddie York put together. So Eddie York is the individual who did the... let me get Eddie's thing up here too. Eddie York. Yeah, so Eddie is the artist for Nova. Eddie did the cover art and all of the Spark art that you're going to see. Jam did all of the layout. Two incredible artists. And, funny, just to kind of touch on the frame thing a little bit more, I reached out to Eddie and I was like, I need somebody who can make really cool, like, robots. And here's what I did. I looked at Eddie's website and I found, let's see if I can find it quickly enough. I found this. So Eddie had made like art like this, which was like these sort of exosuit sort of things. And I was looking at like this and I went, holy shit, this is so cool. This guy gets exactly what I'm going for with these mechs. And I reached out to Eddie and I said, do you want to do this? He said, yeah. And I said, I just need you to be aware of the fact that we have to make these look not like Warframes. And I explained the situation, and he had heard of similar things happening before, so he knew to kind of avoid Warframe a little bit. But I mean, damn, this is so cool looking, like so cool looking. And this sort of silhouette style of exosuits is how Eddie and I got started. He started making sets of exosuits like this, and we worked from there to build the Sparks. So that led to the cover. Yeah, the art is so good, right? Yeah, Eddie, that's a really good point, Dice Ghost. Eddie was a crucial force for the development process, and honestly is probably one of my favorite artists I've ever worked with, because it was a two-directional sort of cyclical process for us, where like I would give Eddie loose descriptions of things, and then he would give me like a bunch of different things, but then he would inject his own ideas into things. Like he'd be sending me things and be like, I think here's how I interpret this Sparks like role or origins. And we ostensibly were building the lore of these mechs together, which was really cool. Instead of it, being like, here's the brief, draw what I tell you to draw, it was this cool back and forth development thing. And like you can see here from the cover art, a totally different art style than everything else that we see in the book. These sort of halftones, the dots thing, turned out amazing in print. It's up there. It looks so good. So Eddie did a fantastic job with the art. Really, and like Dice Ghost said, was sharing stuff in the server. Huge inspiration to me and everybody who got to kind of be a part of it. So major shout out to Eddie. I always shout out my partner Kate in all of my dedications. So yeah, here's the team. And it's important to acknowledge the team. Nova was not just me. Eddie, as you saw, did the cover and interior art. Jam did the layout, which you're going to see now for the rest of this is just gorgeous and amazing. The GM tools design, which I will talk about when we get to it, that was Jeremy. Jeremy made this. I hired out for that stuff because I hate designing that stuff. And Jeremy came in, he and I had an awesome meeting, and he built it. Jeremy gave you that. And Will, my go-to editor, they're the very best. Will was the editor for Nova. I have Will edit all of my games. It's speaking of art and layout, how did you go about designing the character sheet? Oh, that's a really good question. Jam did that entirely. I had a really simplified version of the character sheet that I did that was almost inspired by how the light character sheets look. Let's see if I can just like find if that is on the light page. I don't know if it is. So it was kind of originally inspired by these really simple sheets, and I sent that filled out to Jam with the Nova stats instead of these light stats, and I was like, here you go. I'm not a layout person, but this is the information at least, and like kind of how I see it being organized. And she took it and just ran with it, and not only made it look cool, but I think organized it in a way that was much better than how I had it organized in my head or on the page prior. I had some great people who helped me with the Danger Room scenario. That's what we call the playtesting, so thank you to that. The Discord, awesome. And Tony, I mean, without Tony and Plus One EXP, I mean, huge lifter of the community. It's illuminated. There's my logo. Owen made that. It's fucking great. Okay, so here's an opportunity to talk about Jam's layout. This right here, table of contents, and like a lot of the headers, like a brief history, rules, all of these, Jam drew them, like with ink on paper. So calligraphy style, drew them, and she sent me sheets of these things that she had been practicing with. And she would draw them out actually with ink and pen, not like a digital painting. And then when she had the one that she liked, she scanned it into the computer and digitized it and used that as the asset. So like going beyond like just like on your like tablet drawing out the assets digitally right away, she inked these things, which is so cool to me. So cool. Yeah, the Lumen logo is very cool too. MV made this when MV did the layout for Lumen. Oof. A good logo, powerful, extremely powerful. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Nova as like a game. It's a Lumen game, so pretty much you just need D6. You're not gonna need anything else. It's a typical GM player-filled game. As you can see, I've stopped writing the what is an RPG section in my RPGs because whoever picks up my game isn't learning about RPGs for the first time. They've seen Dungeons and Dragons. So I just don't write it anymore. Plus, I don't think it's a helpful section in general. The what is an RPG? What is this game is infinitely more useful than what is an RPG. Because what is an RPG doesn't mean anything. What this game means a lot. Just to let you know, Lumen completely changed my design philosophy, and I really wanted to thank you for. Oh wow, that is awesome! I'm so glad that you like Lumen so much. I really appreciate that. I'm really thankful for everybody who has latched onto or enjoyed Lumen in one way or another. There's so many cool things that have been made with it. I'm really happy. I've had a lot of people say that it's the first time they made a game, which is cool. So I'm happy about that. All right, so I did like a brief history, and this is it. This is the history of the game. I leave holes and stuff. This history is one that I have adapted from a game that my friend Mike and I wrote a long time ago. We did a 200-word RPG entry like years and years ago called Dim. And the premise, like the theme of that challenge was the sun exploded. So we had this idea of sun shards and things like that, but it wasn't mechs, it was Guardians. We were Destiny fiends, so that it was the impetus that created Guardians. But like the idea of sun wells and like cities being built around these shards is something that Mike and I built together. And I reached out to him when I started thinking about doing Nova with Lumen, and I was like, are you like, can I go with this? Can I run with this? And of course, Mike gave me his full blessing. Mike is the person who does the the art and layout for Slayers, for the new one, Slayers 1.5, and for the Slayers Almanac. And he also did the art and layout for Dust. So if you like Mike's stuff, check him out. Yeah, I just love leaving it open lore-wise. Also because I got a shit ton of stuff that I have planned for Nova, including like possibly just a lore book that has no mechanics in it, like just fun like short stories, things like that could be really cool. So yeah, the premise is Sun explodes. It's a huge bummer. We built the sparks as a result of it. When I was first reading Nova for the first time, I realized you don't say how many players can play. Yeah, you can play with however many you want. Though I guess I don't explicitly say that it probably isn't a solo game, but otherwise, one GM, one player totally works. Kind of depends on which spark you pick. Might be hard to be effective with like a Voyager spark, but who knows? Could be interesting. So Nova is a Lumen game, which means power fantasy, which means I took the Lumen dice outcome range, whatever it's called. And basically how Lumen games work, if you're not familiar, is what matters isn't what you can do, it's how you do it. Because the assumption is you can pretty much do anything. You're incredibly powerful beings who are gonna be able to like attempt to do anything. You're not gated from being able to do things because you don't have a skill or anything like that. Instead, it is the approach that you take, the sort of mindset you have in how you try to do the thing. And it's generally broken down into you try to do the thing with like force or strength, you try to do the thing quickly or reactionary, or you do the thing like slowly and methodically. And you can think about that in all sorts of scenarios, like combat certainly, but also like communication, right? A powerful emotional thing versus like quick talking and deception versus like a slow methodical persuasion are three different approaches to convincing somebody to do something. And generally you're going to succeed because you're going to just roll a dice pool. Everybody just has 3 stats that are related to those 3 things. You roll a dice pool and you keep the highest die. And usually you're succeeding and succeeding and succeeding in these sorts of games. Very rarely do you have consequences. Also, very rarely in Nova do you roll the dice. And this is a huge departure for Nova from other things. And we'll talk about that when we get to the flare system. But unlike Light, which is sort of like pre-Lumen game, you're rolling dice all the time. Nova abandoned that idea in a huge way. Oh god, doesn't that look cool? Jam took one of Eddie's pieces of art and made it look like this, and it's so cool. So here are those attributes that I talked about. Sun, moon, and shade. These are the ones that I came up with. Same idea, though. Powerful, quickly, practiced, essentially. Here's my partner doing a really good job in this example of play. And you'll see here that if you've looked at other... I know, aren't these icons so good? Oh my god, they're so good. Jam had really good icons for frame, too. So if you look here, a character in Nova is pretty simple, especially compared to other Lumen games like Light or things like that. It's the three attributes, the health and the resource, which we call fuel in this game. That's every Lumen game, almost. I say that, and then there's immediately a game that breaks that rule. And then you kind of play around with it from there. They've got powers, and they have ways to modify the powers. And that's it. There's no, like, gear in this. There's no other sorts of things that we saw in Light, like perks or melee powers or anything like that. I wanted it to be fast and powerful. Because, again, when I was first casting Nova, I was rebuilding Frame. And Frame was a Warframe game. And if you've ever played Warframe, you know that Warframe is about insanely fast combat. It's fast and stylish. You're bullet jumping and doing all kinds of ridiculous stuff. And it's a wild display on the screen. That's what I wanted it to be here. So I trimmed and trimmed and trimmed with Nova, and I got there even better with Nova than I had with Frame. Um, so Nova is my first time where I wrote up the GM turn in a way that made sense to me, and kind of put it into practice. So I think the GM turn from Lumen is really cool tech. I'm biased because I wrote it, but I think it's really good tech for combat because turn order initiative based combat can be fine, but oftentimes people like check out during their turns. So this literally plays out where all the sparks do a thing in whatever order you want. They're running around doing cool actions. Usually that means using their powers. When they're done, the GM goes, cool, you did your thing, my turn. And they get to do a bunch of stuff with the enemies, but most importantly, they also get to update the fight in a big, meaningful way. They get to change something. They bring in reinforcements. They shift the environment. And so combat feels fast, but it also feels fresh as a result of it. That's something that I wanted, is the constant like just back and forth that you see in combat for some games, where it's I swing my sword and then you swing your sword at me and we're gonna just keep hitting each other until one of us is dead, is boring it's just so boring to me. I hate it. So for Nova, the GM turn is specifically designed so that you challenge the sparks. They're going to win. And I say this, and this is an intentional thing. The sparks are going to win fights. That's the whole point, that they win. But challenge them in winning that, because like you know they're gonna win, so make them earn it in an interesting way. Like you shift the battle so that it changes their expectations. They have to change their tactics. So it's not just I swing my sword, I swing my sword, I swing my sword. They gotta do something different. It's gonna be cool, whatever that new different thing is, but it's different, and I like that. Yeah, I want to let the players be the heroes, and in being a hero, you should feel badass. In most of my games nowadays, I've sort of eliminated the idea of player death, which is actually really interesting following the, because I know a number of you who are here now came from the TPK stream just before this that was about death and RPGs. In most of my games, I've just eliminated character death. Basically what I say is if you want it, you can have it, but I'm not putting in rules like on how that happens. So it's up to you to decide if somebody dies and actually stays dead. For the most part, for me, they die and they like disappear for a second and then they're back. In Nova, it's even better. In Nova, when you die, you go supernova. And you're going to see this with some of the sparks that we talk about. Basically, you get to activate an even more powerful ability than anything that you had before. And then you're going to fall down, and then you're going to stand back up and continue being a badass. So actually going supernova and dying is very fun. It's very cool. The players will almost then intentionally throw themselves into dangerous scenarios. And I wanted that. I wanted them to just constantly be throwing themselves at the enemies, at the action, rather than trying to be slow and methodical and like ideal tactics. There's no ideal tactics. You're gonna win, so just have fun with it. Yeah, have that anime death moment. Exactly. So yeah, here's the. Oh look, and I even put Keegan in the example, and Ty, because they were my playtest. So yeah, here's the GM turn. So that changing thing is really important. The other big thing is drops. I deviated with drops in Nova than from core Lumen. One of the concepts of the GM turn is that after the players do stuff, the GM moves the enemies around and then they generate drops. Very video game. Like literally like items or like health or energy drops from the enemies that the players just magically absorb to keep the fight going. Super video gamey. Very intentionally so. In Lumen, I'm pretty sure I wrote it where drops are usually just like a 50-50 split between like health and fuel or the resource. and enemies are always dropping them. I reined it in a little bit with Nova, and the range that I chose here is intentional. So 1 to 2 no drops. So that sometimes, because they're going to be mowing down so many enemies, they just simply won't drop things. So we're not being overwhelmed with drops, because actually the drop tech can slow down combat if there's like 10 drops all of a sudden. So we reduce the number of drops a little bit by adding a no drop option. 3 to 5 then, huge range of our drop range is fuel. Fuel is the resource that's used to use powers. So this is me telling the game, telling you all, I want you to keep using the powers. And that's pretty much all the players are doing during combat anyway. So they need the fuel. They need to keep getting it back. Only 1 out of 6 times do they get health, which is, again, me telling you, if you die, you probably might. It's not going to be the worst thing in the world. You're not going to get a lot of healing back. You might, but if you die, you're going to supernova, and then you're going to come back. So it's okay that you're not being inundated with tons and tons of health. Instead, you need the fuel so that you can keep being badass. Yeah, most enemies in Nova are pretty low HP anyway. Most of them just drop with like 1 or 2 hits from the sparks. Alright, so here's how you make a spark. You pick one, and then you program it, which is me saying pick those 3 attributes, put some points into them. And then this thing is the one that I think is I think this is the interesting thing here, is every spark starts with health and fuel at 2, and then you can spend 8 points in whatever way you want. Which means you can put 8 more points in fuel and put no more points in health if you wanted, and just have infinite powers and be supernovaing a lot. You could put a bunch of points in health and not as much in fuel if you want to sort of like emphasize using powers less frequently and actually using rolls more in combat, or you could go for like a balance. I think that's an interesting opportunity for players to specialize their characters in a way that's different from one another. Like, there's no inherent reason that Warden, who's like the tank spark, has more HP. They don't. Every spark has 2. So if you're the Warden and you want to play like a tank, you'll probably put more points in health, but you don't have to do that. And I think that's interesting. Abilities all cost 1 fuel, so every ability is 1 fuel, to answer that question. Speaking of enemies, how do you quantify the moves they have? Is it more up to the GM's discretion? I personally just go with 3 moves. I just like 3 cool, straight to the point moves that, like, one usually tells you like the attitude of the enemy, and then the other 2 are usually some sort of like reaction or action. I like a nice simple list of 3 things personally for the moves. You'll see later on that Jeremy added a little bit to that by having things like keywords, which adds a layer of complexity that certainly makes enemies interesting in Nova. But like in Light, for example, you see enemies are just like, how much harm do they deal, how much health harm can they take, and then 3 generic moves. And like, of course, you're not beholden to just using those moves. They're there to like inspire you. But I've never really overtly said that. I really like how deep Spark customization and specialization is without getting crunchy. Yeah, oh, thank you. I'm so glad you like that, Raphael. Yeah, I want players to be able to make their character very quickly, feel like they've crafted something that's special, so that even if there are 2 Scorches, they can be totally different. And the other big change is here with the flares. The flares are the mods to the powers. And we're going to talk about that when we get to it, because the flare has an interesting story with how it got created. But the mods and the build mentality of Nova is what I think is interesting about it from a game that goes on as like a campaign. So I'll talk about that. And then you just like describe who you are. One of my players did straight up put all their points into fuel. They were explosive. Yeah, that's awesome. Good for them. I mean, do their moves act the same way as player moves? For instance, a Hellion Shock Trooper has Focus Fire. Does that act like a player move where it does a certain amount of... Oh, I see. No, they don't. So the moves are purely there for you as a GM to interpret as mechanically as you want. So for example, in Light, there is an enemy who just one of their moves is absorb damage with a shield. And it doesn't mechanically explain what that means to like absorb damage and with a shield and like how much they can do it. It's just a thing that the GM can do to lean into that thing that forces the players to do things differently. So if suddenly the enemies are focus firing, like the Hellions are focus firing, it will cue the Sparks into the idea that like they've got to change something. It's exactly like Dungeon World Monster Instincts. It's exactly like that. Yes. Then you jump straight in. I give you some advice on other starting points, but here's the Sparks. Let's talk about these Sparks. Pyre, the very first one, the first Spark. Uh, Sword-bearing badass hunter is essentially what the Pyre Spark is. In fact, the first 4 Sparks are what I call later in the lore Wave 1. So there are 2 waves of design for the Sparks because I initially only designed 4 of them. Pyre, which was sort of your like sword wielding combat person, Scorch, who was the caster, Warden, which was the tank, and Voyager, which was like the support scout. And then I started making weird Sparks. Then I started doing vampires and necromancers, and I called that Wave 2. And then yeah, we're gonna get to Infernal. Infernal was the true strange one, but very cool. Let me prime that by. Let's see here. I want to make sure I find that that original Infernal art. Oh, I think I know where it is here. So I'll come back to this. So yeah, just to kind of like talk about the Sparks, because I'm not going to go into each of them in detail with how they work, but like generally how I broke these down is that they have a passive, and the passive tells you what is the like sort of the role or like general like the MO of the Spark. So this is telling you this Spark wants to be close to people so that they can automatically just do damage to them at the start of the turn. It tells you right away between that and this picture, this Spark wants to be close to people. Did I worry about power creep when designing new waves? Honestly, I worried about it a little bit because there was certainly an increase in power or complexity in the Sparks in Wave 2 than there were in Wave 1, which at first I was worried about because I tell myself all the time to not care about balance, and I truly don't care about balance, but it's hard to turn that off entirely. But I settled in with like being totally fine with it because what it allows people to do is choose. Yeah, it's a feature, exactly. It allows people to choose the crunch buy-in for the game that they want. The game itself is relatively rules light, and you can add complexity to the game personally as a player by choosing one of the more complex Sparks and playing with the mods, and then you could just choose a really straightforward Spark like Pyre here, and you don't have to do any interpretation. Like, for example, all of Pyre's powers at their base are just flat amounts of damage. And that became a big thing that started to emerge later in design that I kind of dripped back. Like, all of Pyre's stuff is just, this is exactly what it'll do. It'll deal 2 harm. It'll deal 1 harm. It'll deal 1 harm. You know exactly what it's supposed to do. And, other Sparks, the future, I changed it, and you'll see what that means in a second. thing is power creep is sometimes design creep. I mean, you have a lot of feedback about how people actually play your game. So same rules, equal power level, but more effective. Yeah, I think like it is a bit of design creep where like I let myself go a little bit with the wave 2, but I was fine with it. It never left like the intention of the game, so I think it worked out. And then here's an example of a supernova, right? So when this person dies, when Pyre dies, they just choose anybody anywhere. They get up next to them, and they deal harm equal to your sun and moon. And that's stats that you choose in the beginning. So if you're interested in playing Pyre, for example, and you're making your spark, you might want to put more points into sun and moon if you plan on dying a lot. The mods, which I will talk about more in detail when I get to the flare system, are every Spark has the same sort of breakdown of mods. There are 10 persistent mods, which are the passive mods, and then 10 power mods that go specifically plugged into the powers, these active powers here. So generally the persistent mods were things like boost to stats, just numbers go up sort of stuff. And then the other persistent mods were usually, as you can see here, mostly centered around the passive. So if I told you, like I said before, the passive is designed to tell you the role of the spark, then the persistent mods, the passive mods for it, they should be leaning into that and maybe altering it a little bit more or empowering it. So, you know, what I've done here with these mods for Pyre, for example, is I've said slashing happens harder or more often, or happens in other circumstances other than just at the start, and then move twice lets you know that Pyre is about getting close to people, so it's really important that you are very mobile. When designing the mods, did you give all sparks certain ones and then add in specific ones per spark, or are they all unique? I think I like, for the most part, like in the persistent mods, I made sure that there was some attribute stuff and some like a health and fuel if necessary to lean into roles a little bit. All the stuff on the right side is totally unique, and then certainly a lot of overlap in the power mods, where I did things like adding range, and that's the other. So how these power mods work is you plug these into power, so +1 range now. Like, for example, you cast a fiery arc, deal 1 harm to all enemies within close range. You slot that range mod into here, now it's 1 harm to all enemies within near range. It's a huge wave of fire that you're throwing out there. And so you can plug that range in, and you can plug a harm thing into there, because each power can take 2 mods. And now you're just, it's huge scythes of fire going on around the place. So that's the general structure of these power mods. Scorch might be my favorite art. I'm a sucker for this. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, I don't have it in this folder. Darn it. There was a really cool spread. Actually, I think I know where it is. 1 second. I think I know where it is. I'll find it. Art. Yes, here it is. So remember when I told you about Eddie's silhouette art? Here's the original array of sparks. And you can see that we used some of them. Like this one in the upper right, this became Voyager. This is what would eventually become Scorch. And I was so in love with the look of this spark here. This one here became Pyre. So in love with the way that this looked. Like this weird Doc Ock. Oh, where's your thick boy? I'm hiding him. Let me hide myself real quick. He's down here. And then it's a very not safe for work drawing if you zoom in. It's supposed to be, you know, like a banner hanging off the front, but it's very funny. That became Warden. yes, still so many unused ones, which, you know, in the future, I plan to come back and use. I have, like, this one all statted out. I know exactly what this spark is going to be. It's this, like, earth shaker, quaking sort of thing that I really like. Just haven't got the art from Eddie and made it yet. But this art I fell in love with so hard. So hard. That's why I think I'm particularly in love with Scorch's art. The rabbit moth. Oh yeah, this might be what the lunar spark looks like when the first season pass comes out later this year. Or no, the lunar spark is later. Yeah, whenever the lunar spark comes out, I think it might look like this. So yeah, Scorch, I just love this cool barcode and the Nova symbol. And right here, like, now we're starting to see that the sparks are technology that does not make sense to us, right? And that's kind of the goal. Also, let me see if I have it here. I don't think it would be in... I wonder if it's in this, because... Yeah, okay, so here's a fun thing to talk about with art. This is the original Pyre art. It's amazing. It's amazing. Previously scribbles down an idea for new sparks to do. Yeah, new sparks. You love that the video. Oh yeah, I'm gonna take everything from video games and put it into RPGs. That's my goal. So this was the original Pyre art. Amazing. And actually much more in line with how Eddie traditionally does painting. And I saw this, and it was really, really cool. And then I saw... But then, like, I was looking at the silhouette art, and I was like, I really like this, like... I like this silhouette art. I like this, this vibe of... Let's see if I can get her over. There you are. She's sleeping in the corner. Sleepy dog. I loved the silhouette art and early stuff is Eddie would just paint like geometric colors on top of those silhouettes to get ideas. And I saw that and I went, actually, I kind of love this style. Can we do this? So slightly less detailed. More like blocky in some ways. Just a couple of strong colors instead of this really detailed rendered painting, which is obviously incredible, but this fit the vibe and sort of the style that I knew Jam was going to be going with way more. And so Eddie pivoted. It actually was one of those wonderful things, right? I mentioned this to Eddie and he went, I was kind of thinking the same thing. I had a conversation with a friend and they were like, I like this other stuff. And so, you know, it worked out in such a wonderful way. I really like this style of art. So Scorch is a personal favorite of mine. Yeah, so Scorch, again, is just, it's the caster, so you're going to do way more like range stuff. But Scorch is an example of when I started to change the tech a little. So like powers now are linked to attributes, right? So this is a power where this person takes harm equal to your shade. So now you can be a little bit more proactive in building your character in the very beginning by thinking, okay, if I want to use the snuff out power a lot, I want a huge shade, a huge amount of shade. And for example, like kindling is about your sun. So using sun as your primary stat. And that will get into like the build technology, like in mods that I'll talk about when we get to the flare system. So I'm a huge sucker for Scorch. I also think if Scorch isn't my favorite art, this might be my favorite art. I'm a sucker for like fast moving, speedy support classes, and Voyager is the first spark. Canonically, in the lore, Voyager was the first spark we made because we had to go explore these terrifying area that we would call the Dusk outside of our cities. And Voyager sparks were the first ones that were built. to go do the recon. And like this is this really cool looking flare that it's got going on. Same kind of color scheme as, and all of the sparks you might notice have sun shards on them that are a different color that matches the spark. So here's Voyager's shards. Obviously, Scorch's are in the antennae. Pyre's got them in the shoulders. But I love Voyager because they're all about marking people. They mark people, support people. They drop these distracting holograms and everything like that. They literally swap people around the field. They're such a pain in the ass. They can cause so much chaos. And here's the cool thing as a reminder, this is a support spark. And in combat, you can choose the order that the sparks go. So like if you've got a Voyager, oftentimes you're gonna have them go first because they're setting things up. They're marking enemies so that the other sparks do well. They are swapping people into advantageous positions. And you have the ability to do that all the time. Or switch things up and wait for that swap to come later. Like have somebody go in, do something extremely reckless, and then have Voyager swap later is the flexibility that you have because of the combat system. Warden, here's everybody's favorite thick boy. Warden is, I think, probably the Gila RPG's server's favorite spark because of the original art. But everybody loves the thick boy. I love Warden. Warden looks so cool, and there you can see the shards there in the wrists, like in the pauldrons. His huge, massive shield, and this handle is very intentional. Because I told Eddie, there's like, you slam down an extending shield, and in my mind, I'm imagining like a force field. I'm imagining like this plasma shield or something like that, because I'm thinking like a Titan in Destiny. And Eddie's like, well, here's what I thought it was. I thought it was literally a shield that has a handle, and he hurls it, and it just extends, and he holds onto the handle and slams it down and makes a wall. And I was like, that's way cooler. So that's why you see like the cool wear and tear. This cues you in that Warden is a tank as opposed to like look at Scorch, shiny, new, only like a little bit, but that's just like shadow effects, shiny and new. Warden, torn up, messed up, very rough and tumble. I love the Warden spark. And then Wave 2 began. And then I was like, what if I started making these sparks scary and weird and monsters? So Wave 2 are essentially monster sparks. Pox is the plague spark. And I had no idea what Pox was going to look like. You know, I think looking back at the old silhouettes, I should really keep those open. Looking at the old silhouettes, I think Pox was going to be this one at first, and then we deviated, and Eddie just came at me with this. He's like, well, I made this, what about like it's a weird bug and bird sort of thing? The bird being the inspiration from like plague doctor masks, and then the bug being is it's a pestilent, horrible spreader of plagues. So yeah, Pox is really cool. And then this is where certainly complexity of the characters starts to ratchet up. So this is like, Pox is a damage over time character. It's about getting infections on characters as much as possible and waiting. Actually, Pox wants the fight to go on a long time because enemies just start to die more the longer they are infected. And so Pox is actually kind of like a little bit counter to how play in Nova works, but also certainly more complex, but in an interesting way. Same thing with Grim, the Necromancer. I knew I had to make a Necromancer spark because we, at the time, like everybody in the server was talking about or reading Gideon the Ninth or Harrow the Ninth, the Locked Tomb trilogy, because Keegan had made an Extremis, which was obviously a Locked Tomb based Lumen game. I hadn't read it yet, so I was reading it and I went, okay, I am so into this. Oh, the server link. It should be in my website. I think it's down at the bottom here. Yeah, there should be like a little Discord. So if you just go to my website, link it from my Twitter, you should be able to just get into the server. So everybody's talking about necromancers, and I'm like, well, I gotta put a necromancer in here. And this also then starts to get, like, the sparks were already this thing of, like, we're not really sure how the science of these sparks works. They're really strange. And then I was like, yeah, and then necromancy's a thing. And that was when it went really weird. But basically the premise, and I think Eddie did a really clever idea with this, is that these swords, which in the original art were connected by cords, but now we've just made them hovering, they stab in and cause a connection between, like a neural connection between Grim and whoever they stab. And so they use that as a means of puppeting whoever that they resurrect, so to speak. Real gnarly stuff. I like it a lot. Drifter's not so spooky. Drifter is one of my favorite sparks. And Drifter is also probably the most broken spark in the whole set. Also, this is Drifter Sun Shards right here. The bullets in the bandolier. Such a nice little touch from Eddie. Alright, so here's why Drifter is interesting. We'll talk about how broken Drifter is in just a second, because everybody who's ever talked to me about balance problems with Noah has brought up Drifter. And I go, yeah, I know. But Drifter is really cool to me because they have a power that deals with each range. So Drifter is meant to be like a weapons platform to like practice different sorts of powerful things, and so they have one power that works at each range, and that's like that range's thing. So and then also hooks things up with the attributes. So like the far range is hooked up to shade, close hooked up to fuel count actually, and then you've got a couple of near ones because I have 4 powers, so there's going to be one that doubles, but one being related to sun and one being related to moon. And like I think duel is a really cool power. You shoot them, deal your moon damage to them. If they survive, they hurt you back. So it's a duel. So it's you're kind of risking it. You're like, do I think I can kill this thing in one shot? I'll take a shot at it. But this immediately tells you that Drifter is about position. It's about trying to get into the right move. So that's why I took that Mercury thing, which Pyre had above, and gave it to Drifter as well. Drifter wants to be able to decide what range they are from targets so that they can lean into the powers that they've built towards. Drifter is also broken in some ways, but I think it's intentionally so, and it's okay. You can, unlike any other spark, reduce your total amount of fuel with Drifter. You want to be out of fuel with Drifter because they're passive. Whenever you have 0 fuel, at the end of your turn, you activate your superpower, or your supernova. So you can activate your supernova without dying as Drifter, and then you get 3 fuel back. So you have to spend that fuel again in order to get back into empty clip. But this -1 fuel just reduces your total amount of fuel that you can carry. And so you can get into cycles where you just keep activating your supernova, and that's totally fine. That's totally intentional. The supernova is powerful. It's 2 harm to everybody, but it's only at a specific range. So you can only do 2 harm to everybody at close when you supernova, or 2 harm to everybody at near, or at far. So it's powerful, but it's also still limited. I think it's a really cool spark, but some people are like, it's broken. I'm like, as intended. I'm glad that you think it's cool. Sanguine. So I was like, what about a vampire? Why not have a vampire in here if we've got a necromancer? So Sanguine exists as the vampire spark. Their thing is about having a like bonus version to each power. So if you activate the blood effect, so like you spend your health in order to have fun suck your fuel. If you spend your health, you get like more powerful versions of your powers. And this is when I was just like, fuck it, I don't care about like what makes sense from a fictional perspective. You literally burst into a swarm of bats. Like, how does that work as a mech? What happens to the pilot inside? I don't know. Maybe there is no pilot inside Sanguine. Maybe Sanguine is just a vampire robot. Also, Sanguine is like the least likely or possible to die. They have a really interesting supernova where like they lock up and then they come bursting out, absorbing health right away, which is a little bit different than the supernovas from other sparks. And then there's Infernal. And then I was like, but what if I put the devil in the game next? And do I have the art? I don't think I have it here, which is such a bummer. Oh, this is, by the way, when I was talking about like the blocky colors over top of things, this is what I meant. I saw this and I was like, I kind of love this. I love this style. And so this is how we pivoted to the new art style with Eddie. Damn, I don't think I have the Infernal promotional art here in a way that I can pull it up easily. Oh, thank you for following, Rumple Dumple. But Eddie and I were like, if we fund a bunch, what if we do add another spark? What if we add the devil and it's like a nightmare spark, like truly a nightmare spark? And we ended up with Infernal here, which Eddie made some of the coolest promo art for it. It was these weird warped versions of the Kickstarter banner with like Infernal floating before the sun. It was terrifying and so cool. I'm sure you can find it somewhere. Angel Sparks would be cool, right? Like, what would like the Celestial Spark be, right? The spark that is like the counter to Infernal. Infernal was probably the hardest spark for me to design. Definitely the hardest. I had a really hard time deciding which direction I wanted to go with the devil. Because there's a few directions you go. You could just make it really powerful, right? It could just be a really powerful being. Then I was also thinking of like the lore of the devil as like a trickster or like a deal maker, like making a deal with the devil. And so then I kind of thought about it as like this like bonds thing, like you made bonds with enemies that like empowered them, but then you gained power from the bonds, and it got complicated. Then I started thinking about things with like the sins, the 7 deadly sins, and I was like, how can I capture the sins as powers? I'm happy with where I ended up with this. I think Infernal makes sense this way, but honestly, this one was the hardest one for me to design. We just knew it was going to exist because Eddie made cool art, and then I had to design the thing. I just love the supernova though for Infernal. All enemies within close are dragged down to hell and killed. That's it. Straightforward. It just does that. They're dead. They go to hell. And I think that's cool. The flare system is, I think this is a really cool thing and unique thing about Nova. So, like I said before, Light and Frame were the games that came before Nova. And they were designed as looter shooters, which meant the characters have weapons. And weapons are usually like randomly generated loot sort of stuff with tags and things like that. And then I started to do that with Nova. I said, okay, I will make weapons for these sparks to use. And the powers will be things that they just use sometimes. They're primarily going to use weapons. And starting to feel really unsatisfied with it. And so then we switched to this other thing called Flare. And Flare wasn't this mod thing before. Flare was a modular weapon. Essentially, all the sparks had a weapon that they could customize. And it was basically like you did like a point buy with tags to put on combat and non-combat related tags onto your flare. So if you wanted to, you could bring in a flare that like doesn't do any damage, but it has a bunch of like non-combat or supportive tag sort of stuff. Or you could bring in a big ass gun. And even still, it was unsatisfying because ultimately it was just sort of discovered like the sparks themselves are the weapons. They are powerful enough on their own. Make them be the thing. And then to connect it back to Warframe, to me, when I used to play Warframe, the stuff that was interesting about Warframe that made it different than Destiny is you could use your powers, your abilities, way more often than in Destiny. In Destiny, I'm a warlock, as I'm a warlock main. I put an unreasonable amount of hours into my warlock. But I don't feel like a space wizard the way that I should. I don't feel like I'm doing all the cool casty sort of stuff that I should with my super and grenades and melee as much as I should be able to, because there's like long cooldowns on these things. So I wanted to create the character that would allow me to do that. So the flare system turned into, okay, the Sparks don't have weapons anymore. They only use powers. So their whole use of interacting with combat is only with powers. They're not going to have weapons. And so how do we make those powers interesting with time? And that's where this mod system was created. When I describe Nova to people in terms of progression, I tell them, you're already level 20. You're already max level in Nova. It's about creating builds, right? So when you're, if you play like an MMO and you're max level with your class, it's about getting the gear that lets you have certain types of builds, right? It's always about just getting to the builds side of those games. So that's how I imagine flares in Nova, is that it is a builds sort of thing. You can pick and choose any combination of these mods that you want to make the build of the Spark that you want. So just to like look at, let's go back up to Pyre as a nice straightforward example, right? Like, here are the power mods, right? +1 to range, and you have 2 mods that are +1 harm. And any power can have 2 mods slotted into it. Each power also has 1 mod that is very specifically designed to it. But there's plenty of these that are just generic, right? So like, you could say, I'm going to take these 2 +1 harms and I'm going to put them into Singe, that casting thing. And so now anybody who's within close to me is going to take 3 harm. Now I've got this really powerful close range attack. Or you take +1 range and +1 harm, and now it does a little bit less damage, but it hits more people. Or you could do +1 harm and overclock it, where you can spend more fuel, and now you can double the harm that it does. All of those change the way that the power works in a way that you get to decide. You're building the Spark to play the way that you want to play it. That becomes especially relevant when you're building the Sparks at the beginning and deciding attributes and health and fuel, and also with things where like certain powers are connected to attributes, like Drifter, for example, right? Drifter is all about connecting to sun, moon, and shade, right? So naturally, I'm going to give you the ability to increase your sun, moon, and shade in places so that you can decide, yeah, I actually really want to like lean into this dual power, so I want to max out on moon. So I'm definitely going to take this moon persistent mod, and then maybe I'll take a -1 fuel. I'm really proud of the flare system. I'm really proud of the way that the mods work that creates this thing so that you are making builds of like max level characters rather than like earning the right to be powerful. You're powerful already. Decide how you want to feel powerful in this game. So I'm really happy with it. I think generally folks seem to like it. So I think it's a perfect fit for Nova, where I didn't want advancement to be like a huge thing. It's just getting access to more mods. As opposed to something like Light, where advancement is important through increasing stats, getting new loot, and increasing your reputation with factions. Like, advancement is important and multi-pronged in Light. In Nova, I wanted it to be streamlined. I wrote stuff about Session 0. You should always do a Session 0 if possible with safety tools and everything like that. A lot of this then is going to be advice, and we don't really need to read this stuff. I did put in a little stuff here about creating your own city, because again, there's no canonical city that this takes place in, so I figure you all should probably design a city together and establish some elements about the dangers and everything like that. And now we kick into Jeremy's stuff. So I said that Jeremy did the GM tools design. What I mean by that is the tools for creating missions and enemies were created by Jeremy Gage. Jeremy is a friend of mine. He runs the Draw Your Dice podcast. He's also one of the hosts of the Tabletop Call-In show. One second, real quick, my partner is trying to get a hold of me. I have to make sure that everything is okay. See if that's all okay. So here's the thing about me as a GM. I do not like to prep. I don't like to prep. I don't like writing missions. I don't like prepping enemies or anything like that. It's not fun to me at all. So when it came time to get into this book to write like how to structure a mission and create enemies, I hit a wall. I hit a motivation wall hard. And I was talking with Jeremy about this, and Jeremy is good at coming up with stuff like this, tools. And so I was like, can I just commission you to do this for me? And we put something together, and Jeremy ran with it and did an amazing job. And I'm so happy with how this turned out. So it still has like the concept of briefing, which was something that I talked about in debriefing and everything like that. But Jeremy just put together some really cool stuff. So just sort of elaborated on the concepts of the zones in which this world takes place. So the Crimson's the stuff close to cities. The Dusk is like the majority of the dark, horrible space beyond. The Umbral is the really spooky stuff. And then this health pool thing is really interesting. I'm curious if people use it, how much extent they use it. But basically, Jeremy was like, okay, so missions in the Crimson should be less dangerous than the Dusk and the Umbral. And rather than coming up with like balance based off of like how dangerous particular foes is, it's just how many people do you have to take on as a spark. And so this is just like a collective health pool, where it's like a recommendation. If you're going to do a mission in the Crimson, have approximately 50 health worth of enemies that they have to deal with. If you're going to do something in the Dusk, have approximately 75 to 100 health worth of enemies that they have to deal with. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a nice recommendation for like understanding how many people should I be putting the sparks against. And then there's just a bunch of tables here. I like these mission types. Like, there's your standard go fight the enemies. Recon mission makes sense. The supply one is really interesting too, because this is one where you might not even be doing like a lot of fighting. Like, you might be like in charge of negotiations, or you might be in charge of like defending negotiations. You run the trading module in the city. You know, cool, fun ways to like switch up the mission structure so you're not always going out and attacking things. Then here's another cool piece of tech that Jeremy did, which is the locations. So for the locations, when you have a mission in the Crimson, you need one theme and you need one structure. When you do a Dusk, you need a theme, a structure, and then you're going to transfer to another structure during the mission. The Umbral, you're going to stay in one structure, but it's going to have two themes combined. And these themes are just here to like evoke ideas about what the GM could be presenting to the players at a given time. it's really cool tech. I wish I had Jeremy here to kind of like talk about his process, but it's I think this is a really great tool for people to use for like building stuff. And with the faction turn stuff that's coming, it's gonna work really nicely with what Jeremy has designed here. I'm not gonna get too much into like the specifics of enemies. This is another thing that Jeremy made where they have health, harm, range, and moves, but he added the concept of keywords so that enemies had like a slightly more complicated way of acting on the field. They could have some like basically like passive perks that were more mechanical than just interpretation. And then elites, which are the bosses, this was the opportunity to like shine and show off what this faction could be all about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the factions just because you're going to hear me talk a lot about the factions with the faction turn stuff. But basically, we came up with 4 factions. The scrappy Mad Max-like Hellions who are running around lighting everything on fire, united by Caro. She's uniting everybody under her banner. It is like a trading card game. Yeah, the keywords, absolutely like a trading card game. Caro is badass, and also Caro has sun shards that she has stolen, so you know she has killed some sparks. The Corvus Dominion. Birds, crows are in all of my games. The Corvus Dominion were in light. Then they got added to In Extremis, Keegan's game, and now they're here, which implies they are all part of the same universe. That Light, Nova, and In Extremis are part of the same universe. And we've kind of talked a little bit about the timeline of it. But it's crows. It's weird crow stuff. I love crows. And I love Zircon, Herald of the Black Fleet. What a terrifying enemy. The Haze Dwellers are just like the beasts of the dusk. Just like weird monsters and weird animals. But I love the fact that the main enemy is a dragon. Why not put a dragon in your sci-fi mech game? Why not? And you can see that Gorfang is like wrapped around a sun shard. So there's something going on there. Like it's kind of changed a bit. Like the fact that Gorfang can wrap around it implies some like power. The Lunar Cult I love. These people hate the sun. They hate the sun shards. They want to see them destroyed. They want to see them wiped out. And they are mad prophets out in the dusk trying to bring on a lunar world as opposed to a moon or a sun world. And their enemy is not a cultist, but their main enemy is a spark that has been corrupted. And you can actually see that this has parts of different sparks on it. So like there's Scorch's antennae, right? And like crown from another spark, and like the cabling from another spark, the arm from another spark. It's a cobbling together of them that it has been corrupted by their lunar influence. I do an example mission so you know how to play the game. And then there's a GM section. Not too much to say necessarily about the GM section. I talk about setting. Here's the important thing. I don't understand it. You don't need to understand it. The science, we hand wave it in this. Who cares? Who cares? Just have fun with it, in my opinion. I talk about death. I talk about what I think about in this game in terms of death. But also talk about how if you want to include it, you can. I talk about how I leave things kind of intentionally vague. The important thing is to feel badass. That's a running theme in a lot of my games. Fast combat. So like a lot of the stuff that I talked about earlier, I've just codified it into words here for the GMs to read. So yeah, I don't really think I need to read the GM section to you. I think it's a pretty straightforward GM section, and it's mostly about my design philosophy. So a lot of the stuff that I've already talked about here on stream. I did add this because it's a combat-focused game, and then I was like, yeah, but like some people want to do things other than combat. Like, what do we do in that situation? And so I say, hey, if you want to roleplay in your role-playing game, here are some things that you can do to introduce some of that stuff. just because there's not really mechanical rules in there for role playing. So I give you some advice on how to do that. It was actually, I had a really interesting conversation with Kat on her podcast a few weeks ago about how Lumen and my games typically don't have these sorts of rules and what I think about that. And it's mostly because I don't think that they need rules. And then I wrote like a more extended history, which I don't need to read the extended history. I've kind of been talking about it. But if you want to learn more about the world, you can. Here's Jam's awesome character sheet. Here's the reference page. Here they are in printer format. And then here's the back of Eddie's very, very cool cover. And that's Nova. That's Nova. That's me, how I designed it. There's some insights into how it got to be the way that it is. I hope you all have found this interesting. If there are any like last minute questions, you know, I'm happy to answer them, but I think Nova's special. I hope if you already know Nova, that this has kind of maybe helped you understand it a little bit better, or see where it came from. If you didn't know Nova, maybe this has inspired you to check it out. You can find it on my itch page. You can find it at gilarpgs.itch.io/Nova. In fact, I'm going to just put that right here in chat. Otherwise, I think this is a great time to wrap it up. You all have been wonderful. I appreciate all of your time and your interests with this. Currently tinkering with big boss enemies. Yeah, meaner elites. I like that. Cool. Nice. All right. Well, what do I think are some potential downfalls with that? I think it's speed, right? Speed of combat. For me, I like a fast combat. And because the GM's turn is the GM doing a lot of stuff, because they get to like kind of move a bunch of enemies. If the elites are crunchier, it just slows down or elongates the GM turn. Which, you know, it's not inherently a bad thing. It's not inherently like, you shouldn't do that. But for me, I'm just about speed. I'm just I want my combats to go fast. I want my sessions to go fast, in general. We did a Drifter session today, and we played for a little over an hour, and we were done. And I was like, that was it. That's where I want to play. So for me, the faster you can get things going, the better, in my opinion. All right, cool. Now I think I'm actually going to call it. You all have yourselves a wonderful rest of your day, you know, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever it is you are. Maybe I'll be on later to design the Hellions faction, who knows? But I gotta hang out with my dog. I gotta figure out dinner plans. You all have been amazing. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye! Stream 3.